back to another episode of Resiliency Gardening. I'm Corey Eckman, I'm your homesteading graduate assistant at SRU's McCoskey Center, and today's episode is all about the anatomy of a seed, all the way to when it's a fruit that you get to eat and nourish your body with. And then I want to give you a little bit of an overview about what I mean by potting up your seedlings. So let's dig in. The anatomy of a single seed is much more complex and dynamic than you'd think. I'm no botanist, although I strive to be, but knowing the different parts of your seedlings can be a crucial step to troubleshooting if it's a healthy seedling or not. Starting from the seed itself, it contains food in an embryo all inside what is called a seed coat, which is what we can actually see with our eyes, this part of the seed. This acts just like our skin. It is a protective measure that the seed has until it is finished with germinating and begins to really grow. In this photo, you can sort of see the seed coat on this plant that is growing that you might have seen on your own plants and wondered, wow, that still looks like the seed, how is this growing? So the seed coat is just that protective layer again in which we can see. In this section, I want to talk about seed needs. So with seed needs that I'm about to discuss here is that some seeds need some pretty intense things to have happen to them before they can actually become that seedling. Some need to pass through the gut of an animal to get that cue to be like, okay, I'm ready to grow. Other seedlings have a much simpler way in which they begin to grow, and so this is called germinating when they get that cue to begin to grow. A major seed need is the moisture in which your soil is that it's growing in. Another one is the preferred temperature that the seed needs to germinate. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are just a few of the nutrients that a seed may need as it grows. And although it's not typical of a seed to need light, your seedlings will need light once their true leaves come out. Now the first thing in which you'll notice about your seedling is that the first leaves that are adjacent to each other that I have circled here, these aren't actually true leaves. These are what are called cotyledons, which they will fall off when your first set of true leaves come out. They'll kind of get yellow and fall off, and that's totally normal. Now these next set of leaves that I do have circled here are your true leaves. These look different than those heart-shaped ones that your cotyledons were. These ones are actually your true leaves. They look just like the leaves in which will continue to grow within whatever plant that you planted. In this last picture, what I have circled is what's called the epicotyl. It's where new leaves and new growth will form as your seedling grows. Now that you know a little bit of the basics about your seedlings, let's talk about some of the common seedling tragedies that can happen as you're growing them. This picture is an example of my plants reaching towards the light. I had actually just turned them around from the window to kind of try and stand back up right. I turn them every few hours because I don't have a grow light above these ones. Another way to troubleshoot this problem is simply by trying to invest in a grow light. I know it's, in my own case, not always possible, but if you can, definitely do that and then close it so it doesn't actually get natural light while it's growing. And overall, why this is an issue to begin with is because you're going to grow plants that are just totally lopsided. They won't be good to trellis, and they just will not be a balanced, healthy plant when you go to transplant them. Now, I couldn't find a great picture for this example, but this is when a stem of your seedling is getting yellow and falling over. It looks really thin compared to the rest of the stem. This is what's called damping off. I encourage you to look that up. This is likely an overwatering issue combined with reaching towards the sun too quickly. And at this point, it's almost too late to save your seedling. And you'd be better off buying a transplant at a greenhouse instead. As well as, the only way I know how to combat this is you can sprinkle some cinnamon into your soil. Not so sure how well that works or not. So it's said to combat the fungus that is causing your seedling to fall over. This last seedling tragedy, which is less of a tragedy than the other ones, is just sort of when your soil gets a green mold or a scum on top of the layer of the soil in which your seedling is planted in. When you have a nutrient-dense soil with a combination of that warm moisture that we talked about that your seedling needs, it kind of is brewing a little bit of a mold layer on top of your blocks or on your cell trays or whatever you used. And normally this isn't a big deal to try and fix. You can remove that green soil layer by just being very careful as to take that top layer of soil off, as to not harm that delicate root system. If any of your roots end up showing up after you remove that layer of soil, try to add another new fresh layer of soil on there, and to combat this further is to try and water a little less if your plants can handle it, as that's what's causing your green soil layer with all of those nutrients surfacing. Now I want to demonstrate what potting up means with some of my tomato plants. So a really cool trick I have learned about tomatoes, and this is about the only plant you can do it with. Do not try this at home with any other plant, but definitely with your tomatoes do this. So right now I'm going to pick which tomatoes look best and which I'm going to pot up. Some of them do not look well, so when I turn this around, bring this up close, you can see that first tomato up front is just like sideways, not doing well. So yeah, not gonna choose that one to pot up because it is done. It's not going to make it too well. So from there I'm going to choose my next best one, which they're also big. I don't really love them at all, so I'm going to choose kind of this middle ground one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the bottom of my cell tray, and I'm going just to kind of squish this bottom part to kind of get that soil loose, get the roots loose as well. So this will make it easier. I can kind of pull this out. It's going to be a little rough, but let's see if I can do it without harming anything. So now you can see I don't have too bad of a root bound. You can see some of those roots are going around a little bit, but that's not so bad. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove these two lower leaves, and then I'm going to plant this into a bigger pot, potting up, so that those roots can actually grow further out. And so I'm going to remove these little leaves by cutting them off, and then I'm going to plant my tomatoes all the way up the stem. You don't want to do this with any other plant except for tomatoes, because their stem will actually grow more roots, making this a much stronger tomato plant than originally it would have been. So I am going to cut off those with a clean pair of shears. I need to change hands because that's not my dominant hand, and I'll cut off a finger. So I'm going to cut off these little leaves. Boop. And boop. And then I'm going to place this directly into my pot, pretty far down. So you can see how far down that is, and now I'm going to layer soil on top. This is now almost totally immersed into the soil, which is a perfect thing to do. This is potting up. Now that we potted up, I want to show you what it means to thin. So thinning is something that it's a sad thing to do, but it's something that you have to do so then your plants are not competing with each other. Because when you have planted when you've planted 2 to 3 seeds per cell or per soil block, you're going to have to pick and choose which one is the healthiest plant. So I brought this cell tray down here for purposes of showing you how to thin. And what you want to do when you are thinning is to use scissors, yet again sharp scissors that will cut right through that plant, because you never want to pull it. We only pull weeds because we don't care about their root systems, but in your soil, in your cell blocks or anything like that, whatever you used, you want to be sure that you are being very careful as to not damage the root system of the plant in which you're trying to keep. And so that might be intertwined there, and so all you want it to do is just to die off by cutting it, and it'll actually add those nutrients back to your soil anyways. So I am just going to show you up close that I have a few things growing, especially I'll show you with my sage down here. It's probably some, you can see in that block here, you can see my actual sage leaves, these larger ones. I actually have a smaller sage plant down here that I'm going to get rid of, as well as maybe these weeds or something that accidentally got planted there. So I'm going to take scissors and I'm going to cut everything around these two larger leaves here. And I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done cutting around them. The reason you want to cut two is, again, for competition wise. You don't want your plants to be competing with each other for light, for nutrients. It's just not a good thing. So now I am just growing one healthy plant that I'm going to put my time and energy into. You can have several, of course. I have several sage plants growing in this row, but now you can see that bottom one is now all by itself. And can grow as big as it pleases until I pot this one up as well. Today's final thought comes from Liberty Hyde Bailey, and they say, "A garden requires patient labor and attention. Plants do not grow merely to satisfy ambitions or to fulfill good intentions. They thrive because someone expended effort on them." After you've had a chance to think through that quote a little bit, just know that some plants take longer than the plant next to it will to grow, to germinate. That just has a lot to do with especially what your seed packet says, but the type of plant. So oftentimes you'll find that herbs take a lot longer than some other seeds may take. So just be mindful to always read those packets, as well as trust in your system, in your process. So if you have a setup indoors, if you plan to transplant, be confident in what you're doing, and you're still going to have some casualties at the end of the day, but it'll be way worth it.
I have worked upon the hillsides where the pines sing in the wind, where the renters lived before me and the miners before them.